Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to join you. Thanks for waiting. I apologize. A little bit delayed this morning.
It happens to all of us. We all have kids and we all have kids with issues, so we all know the deal.
Well, I knew that, and thank you for that.
So good to see you. So I'm Jackie Cianzo. We had met in DC. Actually, Jill Eschers joined us on this call from the National
Oh,
Council for Severe Autism from California. So I got her up bright and early for this. So
my goodness.
we had met, a few months ago in DC, and you were kind enough to help us write some letters to CMS and to do some other things. And we were all just so impressed with you. And we're so grateful to have this opportunity to have you talk to us. Um,
Thanks.
Alex, I hope filled you in on who we are. We're the Coalition for Self-Direction, Families for Disability Rights statewide. We've got a great turnout for this call. So everybody's real anxious to hear what you have to say. By a brief way of introduction, because I know you can do it yourself, I was hoping you would share the story about why you call it Think Differently and share a little bit with us about it's a great story I read about your wife, which is usually how we all get corrected with our spouse.
As a yes, as the spouse to a wife, I can assure you that anybody knows that they're generally right and we're generally wrong. I'm happy to jump in and get started, and I also would welcome some questions. It might be even easier as we go along just to do that. But first of all, it was great to meet with you, and I think over at least the last 2 years in Congress, I tried to carve out as best we could a leadership role on issues facing those with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities, their families, and caregivers. And I just would say, even though my term in Congress has come to an end, very fortunate that four of our Think Differently bills have become law, signed by the president before the end of Congress last week. Most notably, our Think Differently database and Think Differently about Transportation Act. One forces public transit, mass transit, Amtrak, to meet its ADA requirements, which really are the minimum requirements under federal law, and the fact that only 30% of their assets meet ADA requirements these 30 years later is, pretty deplorable. But the Think Differently Disability Act is actually born out of what we launched in Dutchess when I was county executive, and that requires the federal government to establish an intuitive web platform nationally of all federal and federally supported services for those with disabilities. So no matter where you live in the country, you can go online, start to answer questions on a web platform that would allow you to kind of direct yourself toward those services and hone in. And this website would provide you then those access, those opportunities that exist for your loved one, for yourself, for the individual you care for, their age, their particular needs, and what services are available and supported by federal taxpayers in your neighborhood. So that was born out of Think Differently. Think Differently was born in 2014, technically, although 2015 it really started to launch. I'm the parent of four children, one of whom, Abigail, is now 20. She'll be 21 in April. Born on the autism spectrum, lives with a developmental disability, seizure disorder as well. And, she was diagnosed very early in life. She was 2 when she experienced her first seizure. Subsequent to that, 3 and 4 years old, both diagnosed and then began receiving early intervention services, which I know, by the way, is obviously an area of real concern for all of you. And so as a parent, I began navigating both being a parent of a child with a disability, but also the state system. This country is what it is. Support for services for those with disabilities funded principally through Medicaid. Federal government pays 50%, states pay 50%, but in New York, of course, New York shifts at least 25, in some cases a little bit less, and in some a little bit more, but about 25% of Medicaid-related expenses are delivered by county governments. And so here I was, a parent of a child with a disability and a county executive in Dutchess County, responsible for administering the very programs that my daughter would have to navigate and get access to. And before her, I knew that they were somewhat complicated. And now with her, I began to realize how complicated and in many ways dehumanizing they are. It's not to discredit the good people who work within Medicaid and the delivery of the services. It's just the system in New York is so bureaucratic, so cumbersome. It's a full-time job just trying to get access. And because of the way we fund it, it also creates adversarialism, right? Local governments, school districts, they're shouldering a major amount of that cost, whereas in other states, the state's paying those costs. And so, as I tell people, my three boys enter public school. There's no question. Their aid is accounted for. My daughter enters public school, and the local school district needs to decide if they're going to, instead of paying $8,000 to $13,000 for her education, or are they going to spend $30,000 to $80,000 for her education? And they have the right to say no. And so the system, as you know, is combative. It's adversarial for no good reason. We launched it differently.
Mark, let me kind of launch in here, because you're not seeing the chat, but you're getting some kudos for that. And just as you talk, I don't want to interrupt your. Well, I did interrupt your story, so my apologies for that. I'm Jim Karp, one of the co-founders of Coalition for Self-Direction. If you can touch on how we can lower the temperature, how we can make it less adversarial and more collaborative, because it feels so often to us as advocates as if we're reaching out the hand of friendship and it gets bitten. So if you can touch on that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Well, we have to confront the funding in New York, and so I'll jump quickly to Think Differently, because it actually does answer the question. The reason we launched Think Differently first, and I'll say how it was, but we launched Think Differently is to create an umbrella under which every organization or service provider that cares for individuals, that care for those with disabilities, wouldn't have to compete against one another. They could fall together under a unified message of advocacy. And what state lawmakers are aware of, although they may not necessarily celebrate it, but they're aware of is so long as the organizations remain separate, there's not a need to address sort of comprehensive and systemic reforms, so long as I can keep one agency, one organization satisfied. And I saw that at the local level. If Down Syndrome Society was able to get their contract, they were satisfied. If Anderson Center for Autism was able to get their contract, they were satisfied. But there was never a collective way to address systemic change. Think Differently was born out of the concept that we all need to be on the same page, advocating for breaking down barriers and creating opportunities. It was born out of the story of my daughter coming home from school in tears. My wife, and I'll abbreviate it for our benefit. My wife trying to contain her and assist her. When I get home, my wife says, you really got to talk to Abigail. And I began speaking to my daughter, and she was just, she was crying. She was beside herself. She said she'd never be able to do this. And I said, what is it that she'll never be able to do? All my friends can tie my shoes, but I can't. And so, yes, it's a much more emotional story, but for our benefit, I'll keep it short. I got down on my knee and did what every failing dad does, and said, let's take out your shoe and let's begin to tie it. And I did start that. My wife, swoops in as if she had been waiting for this moment to say, you can't do that. We need to think differently about the way we teach her. She can do these things for herself. And in that moment, I realized, both as a parent and as a government official, we created a whole system to do things for people who, frankly, if given the greater degree of independence, self-direct, and the independence to achieve those things, they can get there. And so we launched Think Differently as a way to reform our structure. And so within Dutchess County, we began a very a deliberate effort to break down the silos in the delivery of service and to reformat how we connected with people so that government was more accessible to those who needed access. And then we impressed upon businesses and tourist destinations and others, schools and other venues to create more opportunity. And so we launched everything from Think Jobs, which was a job program for those with disabilities outside of the traditional funding streams, getting employers simply to understand that they could employ people with disabilities or that are differently abled and frankly benefit themselves and the individual. To Think Ahead, which is a college level program at Dutchess Community College for those who can transition from K-12 into a college level experience, and all things in between. The Dutchess County Fair, largest agricultural fair in the state, was the first in the country to have a dedicated sensory sensitive day, where no lights, no sounds, no overwhelming impact. We had ambassadors throughout the fairgrounds to help people visit. Simple things like that that changed just really the delivery. And to the question, while not specifically the answer, that also did change the temperature, and meaning school districts understood that the community began to embrace this concept that there needed to be more inclusion. Universal accessibility became our language. And accessibility wasn't just physical, of course, it's intellectual and developmental obstacles. And so municipalities began to understand that they needed to impose new standards for everything from crosswalks to park development, from website access to public meetings. Was this overwhelming? Have we solved all of our problems? No, but there's an underlying sensitivity and understanding that by just changing the way we think about those with disabilities, we can make some measurable differences.
I want to jump in here if I may.
Oh, go right ahead. Yes, let's go right ahead. Yeah.
So where the coalition was born from, and you're about to embark on this cliff of 21 when Abigail ages out.
I'm very familiar and afraid. Yes.
It's a nightmare, but we'll help you. I mean, that's what we've all done. We have all joined together. We all say many times we've learned more from each other than we have from any government program, at all. But we were born out of problems with the self-direction system. And, Jim and I have been doing this a long time. We've got really some premier advocates in this state on this call today. And we've all been trying. We're on our 5th commissioner at OPWDD.
They go through them like we go through shoes.
Oh my gosh. And the problem is now we're looking at the org chart. We're really digging into a lot of things, and we're making some progress. What we've done is we've made a coalition, we've formed an organization, and we've engaged a government relations person, because the kids never have anybody. The agencies all have representation, but the kids don't, and our families don't. So it's given us some traction. And in all the years I'm doing this, and my son's 29, very similar to your daughter with the seizure disorder very early on. The last 2 years, I feel like we're under assault with what's happening.
You are. I'm happy to engage in any effort to get better leadership at the state level that's more sensitive to the issues that we face.
Well, that's what we need help with. We don't have a champion in this state, from what we can see.
Count on me. To the extent I can be useful, I want to be. So what they did to CDPAP, right? The CDPAP program, is in and of itself criminal and devastating, and it will undermine delivery of service, and it will create, I say to people, it'll create Willowbrook, just not in an institution. It'll be out on the streets and in our homes. And for those who remember Willowbrook and in the institutionalized, the crimes that committed in institutions, you know what I'm talking about. My concern is first what she's doing there, the governor's doing there, and the state legislature let happen, is going to show a 1 or 2 year budget benefit, conveniently 25, 6, and 26, 7. Those happen to be important years in politics in New York. 26, a gubernatorial race. They'll show a short-term financial benefit and a long-term harm to quality of life, but also it's going to cost a lot of money. Over time, it's going to cost more than the current program. So the changes she made there are really dramatic and damaging. I brought my concern to the new the current acting director of commissioner of OPWDD. I think the governor is looking at self-direct as a similar problem for her and instead of allowing the wide open opportunity we have for fiduciaries, intermediaries, etc., the state may try a similar consolidation at self-direct at OPWDD that they did through CDPAP at Department of Health. That will be traumatic and devastating. And
so how do we combat that? That's what
got to get your state legislators to understand it. I mean, I will be political. The state of New York is a one-party system. It is overwhelmingly led by Democrats, and I work well with all of them. Listen, you give me a name in the state legislature, probably have a good relationship. But they need to understand that these changes are dramatic and they're damaging. And they need to be told that no matter what your party affiliation is, if you're a Democrat, You need to be able to say to your Democratic legislators, I can't support you, and my friends and family can't support you if you let this happen. And if you're a Republican, you need to say to a Democrat, I can support you if you're willing to stand on the right side of this stuff. Because right now, there's no consequence for taking these votes. And I'm not saying there should be punishment. There just needs to be accountability. I mean,
Well,
these are very, yeah.
our constituents, our stakeholders, our families, there are people that aren't going to be able to get out of bed in a couple of weeks, when their care person doesn't show up because the fiscal intermediary has been choked and closed. I'm going to ask Heather Burrows, if I may, to just say hello. She's been very involved at the state level. She's been doing a few commercials about CDPAP. Her daughter, Devin, it'll be devastating for her family. Heather, can you just chime in a little bit about what you've seen in terms of working with the legislature?
It was really disheartening during the budget cycle. I had reached out to somebody I had worked with at the county level, Josh Jensen, and I was irate. And I thanked him. I said, "Oh my gosh, a couple of you really defended us, and I'm so happy. But what is up with the Democrats? Why are they agreeing to this? I can't understand it." And he said, "Don't be mad at them. They feel trapped. They feel pressured, like all these things." And you think, okay, I appreciate that, but they can still vote and they could say, no, I'm not going to do this. And so that's my biggest push now with people. Don't care about the party, care about the person. What are their policies? How do they treat people? And it helps, but it doesn't help because we still feel stuck, right? Like if we can't get in front of the governor and can't get her attention. And I'm on billboards, I was in commercials. I'm like the face of it, and I'm fine with that. But there's been nothing. There's been nothing except her telling us that we're lying. You've been lied to, being patronizing.
And that we commit fraud, right? That we're all
that we're all fraudulent. If we're a
fraudsters.
parent asking for reimbursement, she doesn't get it. So knowing we aren't a priority for her, I know we won't be in the State of the State address. I know her proposed budget isn't going to make us a priority. How do we change that dynamic? Is it central staff? Like, who do we target to make movement? Because addressing her directly, trying the shame and blame, nothing like that has worked.
Well, I want to take one issue with it. I think actually when groups band together and camp out in the war room outside the governor's office, I think that woman confronted her shopping mall. There's a little bit of feedback. I think those things actually do make a difference, and I would encourage you. And I never, as an elected official myself, I hate to be embarrassed, but I would encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities and to reach out.
You want to come with us?
Yeah, I'll come with you. Yeah, I'll do that.
Perfect.
No problem. I got some free time now. But I also would encourage you in your community to reach out to organizations that provide services to those with disabilities and say to them they have to coalesce around this one message. The convenience of our issues is that no two people that we care about have the same issues. You know what I mean? If I say this respectfully, if you want to advocate for breast cancer, it's easier because it's a singular concern, singular issue, singular funding mechanism, and it's easy to understand that. Right. When you say my kid, has these 17 different things, they're going to say, well, we fund the Epilepsy Foundation, we fund the social, yeah, that's good, but you're dismantling the overarching thing. And so what we need to do, and you need to do, is to get to the organizations, the third parties that provide services for our kids, our family members, everything from the therapeutic horse riding lessons to the foundation and the not-for-profit that employs, the folks that we count on. They all need to coalesce around a singular concern, right? You need to really impress upon them that they need to speak in one voice. And yeah, I do think still confronting the governor. This worked with Cuomo. It works with everything. Politicians don't like to be embarrassed. We don't. And so you do have to take those opportunities. But I would say the second half is where I left off before the question, and that is you got to talk to Republican and Democrat members. I don't agree with Josh. I don't think it's Josh Jensen, right? I know him.
Yeah.
I don't agree.
I think he's trying to talk me off a cliff, if I'm being honest. He's like, you're so upset.
We're tired of being talked off a cliff. We should force them to jump. I mean this sincerely. We are always talked off the cliff. We are asked to accept scraps. when we should be the primary concern. That, the Constitution affords protections to everybody unless you're disabled. And it is a violation of our civil rights, kids, family members, individual disabilities, as much as it's a malfeasance of duty by the state, who has a federal requirement to deliver services. So I say, don't get off, stand on the edge of the cliff and tell Republicans and Democrats together, try to get your Democrat assemblyman and your Republican assemblyman, when you go to Albany, in the same room. Say, I don't want to meet with you separately. And if you're not adult enough to meet together, then you're not adult enough to represent me. And I mean it, because they need to understand the severity of the challenge. New York has the richest Medicaid and IDD services in the country, and yet we are systemically failing. And
Exactly.
it's because the system is so cumbersome and bureaucratic. So lobby day in Albany, it shouldn't be friendly. It doesn't have to take the place by storm, but it should be very clear. This is my story. This is what I'm fighting for. And no, you know what? I don't want to be talked off the cliff, because I'm on the cliff. And when I'm done talking to you, I'm going back home and my kid's on the cliff. I mean it sincerely.
Right.
Use your own personal stories, your passion, and your energy to get Republican and Democrat lawmakers talking together. Ask to speak to the conference. If you're, some of your members have the right. They certainly can ask for a group to come in and speak to the Republican conference of the Assembly, the Democratic conference of the Senate, and say, I want the right to stand before all of you and make this case. No rallies behind the podium where you pat us on the back and tell us we're wonderful and then go off and make these lousy votes. We need these two things, and keep these things to very specific asks.
I like that. What about CMS? What's the likelihood that they're going to step up and say, hey, you fundamentally altered the structure of this program and you didn't ask permission?
Well, I mean, first, the president's bringing in a new leadership at CMS. You'd have to tell me how aggressive they're going to take this issue on. I don't know. I think pressuring New York is always fun for a Republican president, because there's a lot of opportunity to make political and financial benefit. That shouldn't be what motivates us, but at least it does. So there's an opportunity there. I'll tell you, I've asked to serve on the president's National Council for Disability, which would help to direct some of that conversation. They won't make those appointments until May or June. To the extent you have any,
How can we help you to get that?
Yeah.
What can we do?
No, this is silly, right? But any connection you might have to individuals who work in and around the Trump administration should know that.
Okay.
Any member of Congress you should be advocating for that if you want to.
Yep.
Should be advocating for that. I've asked actually to be appointed chair. I don't know that that'll happen, but if at least I can get myself on the council, that would be useful. And I think from that perch, we can add a little bit more pressure. I just wouldn't count on CMS coming swooping in. I think the real solution is to get state legislators so concerned and so embarrassed that they have to take action.
And they should be at this point. And we know if this can happen to CDPAP, it can happen to self-direction.
Exactly.
And if they're not
by the way,
going
that's what I said. That's what I said to the acting commissioner. I forget her name at the moment.
Willow
Bear.
Yes, thank you. And I said, I am concerned what she did to DOH and CDPAP, she's going to do to OPWDD and self-direct. And she said, off the record, so are we.
Yeah.
But the problem is the changes there. Let me just say this, though. It's like putting on weight, right? We eat and don't have the impact for a little bit. So it's easy to put on weight. The cuts that so the changes the state legislature are making now, they won't feel the pain for a number of years. And by then, who knows if they're paying attention. And so they need to feel the pain now, and in a very responsible way, but they need to feel the pain now.
Thank you.
Jim, can I say something before you do about CMS?
Absolutely.
Because, Congressman Molinaro, when we met, you had a young lady, Caitlin Muller, that was working with you, that helped us craft a letter. Where did she go?
Caitlin has gone to work for Congresswoman Julia Letlow. She did previously work for Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis.
Okay.
Congresswoman Letlow has agreed to let Caitlin continue to do some advocacy, obviously through her office. So, they're happy to do that. There are a couple of my colleagues that are still there that'll take this on to a degree.
Great.
And I've said that I'll advocate. Listen, my goal is to be, continue to advocate. And so if I could be helpful at the federal or state level, I will. I
Terrific.
noticed there are a few hands up.
Yeah.
And again, I don't
Do
want to
you
take
want to help
control.
me with this?
Yeah,
I
so
see
let
Jackie
me
Goldberg, I see.
well, let me jump in with my question first, and
Yeah.
then we'll go to Jackie and anyone else who wants to just raise your hand or put something in the chat. Yeah, Bing's asking what is the name, if you can. Okay, thank you, Jackie.
Caitlin Muller.
So turning our attention back to the state, your advice is great to speak with one voice, but it's very difficult to implement. What we have found is that the traditional service providers, fundamentally, what they ask for is more money. Give us
Right.
more money, give us more money. Our belief is that more money, yes, that's nice to have, but it's not going to fix the system. What needs to be fixed, we need to have the freedom to actually spend the money that we've been allotted. And that, for those of us in self-direction, that's the biggest problem. So we have two fundamentally different viewpoints, right? Give us more cash, give us more choice. And it's hard to bring those two together.
Unless some of those organizations who benefit from self-direct dollars are at risk of losing them. And so number one, you do have a strong voice. You do, to the extent you have the ability to cut checks, you have the ability to decide where those checks get cut. Now, is that going to close down the Long Island Association of such and such? No, it's not. But it may undermine their ability to provide service. So I don't mean to say you should only go after them with a stick, but you do have the power of that. But secondly, they want more money, but they also secondarily want the system to work better. So they may not always be on the same page exactly, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't ask and we shouldn't press upon them for this one thing. Like, what's the one thing? We want to undo CD, whatever it is. We want this thing. We need you to support us on this thing. You go after the budget, go after those changes. And by the way, the state budget's written in two ways. There's the appropriations of money in one set of budget bills, and then there's the language of law in the other set of budget bills. Those two things. Support them on getting money. Who cares? I mean, honestly, it doesn't hurt you if they get more money, but ask for their support in exchange for some of those systemic changes that, by the way, they know need to happen. They just don't want to risk losing their money. And so there, to the extent you can, and go to the smaller ones, right? The bigger ones are entrenched. The ones that get those direct flow of dollars, they're going to be harder to move, no question. But go to the smaller ones, go to the ones that are struggling, and say, let's just all lobby together. And again, they're not going to run into risk if they're sitting down with their state legislator. I mean, okay, fine. If they sit in the war room in the state capitol outside the governor's office, they might get targeted to a degree. But if they come with you to talk to your Democrat and your Republican senator, they're not going to have any blowback. It's going to be a reasonable request. But you just need to the extent that you can be more than parents, more than caregivers, and show other stakeholders in the same argument, the more successful we will be.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific.
Jackie Goldberg.
Yes, excuse me. Following up on what Heather said, I actually had a moment of profound fear because when she talked about the fact that self-direction could go the way of CDPAP, I was in a meeting last night talking about how to fill out the survey for OPWDD about self-direction. And somebody at the very end made a point that I had never thought about, which is don't be completely negative, because if they see all this negative feedback and say, well, it doesn't seem to be working, that is their first and primary reason for discontinuing it. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
No, I agree. And by the way, it also only being negative undermines some of the good work that maybe your direct care provider, your ComHab person is doing. So I think that's a valid concern. I think you want to argue structure. And I just want to make sure I'm following the chats too. I think you want to argue structure and sort of the systemic change without necessarily undermining the good work that is delivered, because you do want them to survive.
Well, that's a big part of C4SD's platform. When you look at our website, we have these 90-second clips of why self-direction has changed my son's life, your son's life, how
Yeah.
great it is. And if it just wasn't so cumbersome and filled with red tape, how fantastic it could all be. So that definitely, Jack, we know we have to get that message across. But at the same time, what I think we've been missing is somebody like you. And honestly, that's what we need. When we're not taken seriously when we go to these places, when we talk to people, they dismiss us. So we need help in how to really advocate. And so many of our families are afraid of retaliation, which is really not an unreal thing. It happens. Next thing you know, your budget's cut. Next thing you know, your Medicaid's cut. How do you combat that?
I mean, you got to catalog it and you've got to expose it when it does happen. That's why I think going to state lawmakers is generally safer. They're not as likely to keep those tabs. But if you don't stand up and you don't make the case, it's not going to get any better. And so from my perspective, those are risks that we take. I mean, and catalog and expose them. Joe had mentioned he disagreed about the dollars. I just would say the way New York functions, I know that I shouldn't say this, but they're different funding streams, which means they treat them as if they're their own ATMs. You're not in New York. You're not necessarily competing if you're in different buckets. And the dollars some of the big institutionalized caregivers get come directly out of formulaic funding and one stream of OPWDD and Department of Health. The other dollars for self-direct come through another stream that's Medicaid and Medicaid and some other pool. And I just would say that there is some risk, certainly dollars going to one agency and not to you, but the broader benefit is getting some of those bigger players to see the real risk of the direction we're headed in. And they need to see it. Because they're going to be the next ones. Just understand the way New York did this in healthcare. They centralized everything, and then the big players became so unwieldy and so expensive that they said, "Oh, we got to decentralize everything." They decentralized everything, and then those systems become broken. And it's silly. They don't have any real plan for this. They just react, and so you want them to react to your benefit.
Well, one of the big, concerns about self-direction is sustainability. And many of us realize that at some point it would be fantastic if we could ally ourselves with some of these traditional larger agencies to support, the care for the kids once we're gone. Because that's all I think about is I live my whole life being dead and what's going to happen to my son, So
well,
this is the opportunity for us to be a hybrid, have an alliance. That's what we would hope. But
yes.
We need to get there, and we need somebody to broker that for us because they're just not listening.
Well, and building those coalitions is important. I can't do that from, the basement of my house in Catskill any more than you can, but I mean, alone. So starting to create, listen, the agencies you do business with, the ones, I would, if you have a government relations person, I would ask for the opportunity to speak to them. Even if it's just to have them heard, your voice heard, you may feel it's a waste of time, but it isn't, because it starts to impact them. It truly does. You want those agencies to start paying attention so that they're on the same side of you. The other is start looking for the organizations that have the same self-direct problems you do. For instance, Camp Hill Village. These are residential communities in New York that, because of New York's interpretation of Olmstead, don't get self-direct dollars because they're not as integrated as the state says they ought to be. So as our kids age out, they can't get self-direct dollars or excuse me, Medicaid waiver dollars at Camp Hill Villages because the state says, well, you're not an inclusive environment. Hell, they're the most inclusive environment that exists. They provide so getting them to work with you. There are other, I'm thinking residential, not facilities, but
what's Pathfinder Village?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pathfinder Village is wonderful.
When we came to see you, Jill said very clearly, it's discrimination in the name of inclusion,
Yes.
which is it's wrong. And how do we change that? We keep saying, is it the Frank Melville Act? What is it? What's wrong? What needs to be fixed legislatively that they can pull this stuff on us?
Well, I'm sorry, you need a governor who isn't willing to do it, and then you need state lawmakers to pull it to not vote for budgets that do it. If you don't like any of those things, I'm going to say something horrific. We need something. We need an example to make. I mean, there needs to be something that you can point to say, because you didn't do this, this is what happened. And that's the way the world churns at the moment. Some extreme situation like Willowbrook was. But there are others,
The
like there are.
Anderson School is all over the news with that recent abuse case. I mean, these are
Yeah,
the
I
things
mean,
that
I'll
happen.
tell you that I always believe there are four sides to every story, and I'd like to know all of them. But yeah, there are those situations that we can use as examples that you fundamentally have to use. You should lean on the press, whose some cases are useful to make the case, but
That's
they're still
hard
lazy.
too.
Yeah,
That's
and they're
hard
lazy.
too. They're
Yeah,
so, going back to the state as it is, they're afraid. It's
well, the
terrible.
other is,
It's
listen, I
unheard.
pushed on from the second the governor proposed the changes to CDPAP, we were pushing against them. Nobody paid attention. Richie Torres, who wants to run for governor, and God bless him, brings it up, and suddenly it's newsworthy. And my point is, I guess, take advantage of that too, right? Go to those people who are getting a little bit of attention and say, listen, we don't know if we're supporting you or not, but we support this position, and we need you to engage.
Well, I'd like to share something with you. When Governor Hochul was running quite a while ago, I asked my group of my people, my fellow advocates, let's set up a meeting with Lee Zeldin and Kathy Hochul to just talk about disability. And everybody said, "Oh no, we don't want to give him any." I was like, "Well, he's not going to win." You know what I mean? If this when we do things like this, then you're playing. So you got to remember this, guys. We got to go to both sides. We have to.
Well,
Otherwise,
I agree with that.
same situation we're going to be in.
If, if you want partisanship, you got to be a part of. If you want bipartisanship or nonpartisanship, you got to break it down too. I agree with that. I say quite often. I said it as we started. If you're a Democrat and you're not willing to sit down with a Republican's not going to listen to you because there's no need to. If you're a Republican, you want to sit down with a Democrat, they're not going to listen to you because there's no need to. You need to let them believe that you are winnable. Your vote is absolutely your life is absolutely open to supporting them if they support you, and give them those opportunities. I will say New York is what it is. I mean, getting to the governor is tough. So again, I go back to, that woman in the wheelchair was impactful. And you just need one of those moments. And it's okay. You're not subjects to elected officials. It is okay to disrupt them. It's perfectly fine to be at a press conference where they're talking about water pipes and you say, what about this issue? It's perfectly okay.
Yeah. So this has been great. We've got another 15 minutes, and I would encourage people to ask questions, and either verbally or in the chat. A question I have, just because you seem so adept at framing a story, it's the difficulty that we have is the story is not about our children being left starving or unclothed or filthy. It's really about higher up on Maslow's ladder, them being left in a meaningless life without dignity, without purpose. And it's hard to penetrate the noise of the public market with a story about someone being left without meaning in their life.
That is our challenge, and it's and to go to where I said about what you acknowledged about the media, and I would agree. It's just not a story that they can put on television. I mean, what are they going to show? And then somebody's going to say, "Well, there's a program for that. Why didn't we get that?" And it becomes very convoluted. I just would say, in particular, dealing with lawmakers, form letters, phone trees, generic emails, they don't matter. They just don't. I mean, if you want to be number 16,000 on a letter, feel free. But I used to say when I was in the state assembly, I tell people, when you send me the first form letter, I don't need to read the 1,000th form letter. It's the same one. Your personal story in their face is what will make the difference. Yes, it is harder to say my child will grow up without opportunity. That is harder to make that message work than my child is locked up in an institution. But expressing your very personal experience to them personally does impact them. They're human beings, these elected officials. And so I just would, what I think I go back to is is making sure you're forcing them to have uncomfortable conversations. When they staff you out, say, you know what, I'm not going to leave until the assembly member comes back. Let me let you in on a secret. There is nothing happening in Albany that would keep them from sitting and talking with you for 15 minutes. There's nothing more important going on. And whatever it is they're at, they can get to it again because it happens the next day and the next day and the next day. It's okay to say, I don't be staffed out. I think you should call the senator and I'm going to sit here until she shows up. It's okay to go to their press conference. Maybe you don't want to disrupt the press conference, but you say to them before they get to the podium, before you leave, I need 5 minutes with me and my son. And I'm not going to leave until you do. You just have to use those opportunities because it isn't getting better, and it is hard to make that case otherwise.
I think that's why we have been as successful as we have been as a coalition, because we take the gloves off. We're not looking to make friends with these people. You know what I mean? We're really not. And we're all getting older. You know what I mean? The window's closing here. And for the folks in the EI dilemma, I'm heartbroken that they're doing what they're doing to those kids. When they're 3, they've missed the opportunity to have intervention early. That's disgraceful that she's not being called out on this, and that the legislators, they all just let it happen. I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
Well, I will say is at the county level, we were responsible for delivering EI services, and not many counties speak out about it either, because it's a burden of cost for them, and they don't want to engage.
It's so short-sighted. You know, it's so short-sighted. You know, how do we?
Getting, getting your county leaders to pay attention to it as well, important. But again, I just think your best opportunities are to find those moments to do like the woman did in the wheelchair to the governor, because it does make the difference, and to force the conversation in front of actual legislators, not staff. I'm happy to jump to some additional questions. I do want to say both Heather and Alice, I'm trying to read as I go along. There are tens of thousands of people who will be left without any opportunity if this doesn't get corrected. Yes, someday in the future, there will be significant crises that the state will see. The problem is they're not going to see it until sometime in the near future.
Well, that's why we can't allow that to happen. You know, we just can't allow that to happen. I think Heather, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we just did a comprehensive housing study in the Rochester area. It was very interesting to see over 100,000 adults are living with family members over 60. There's not a nursing home system that can absorb that many people. So in 5 to 10 years, where will these people go? I think nursing homes care for 160,000 people or something. I mean, like they can't absorb this, even if that was okay. And it's not okay. I come from long-term care, and I know what happens to our loved ones in a nursing home. That is for the last chapter of your life. And it also costs like $1,000 a day to put one of our loved ones in a nursing home. That is an insane, unreasonable cost that New York State would absorb. It doesn't add up to me.
This is the problem with CDP. So what the governor did is all about the next 4 years. For the next 4 years, she's going to save money, because they're not going to deliver services at the same cost they're delivering them now, and they're not going to be moving them into long-term care yet. And so this becomes a crisis in 5 to 10 years, crisis, and it's the next governor's problem. Right. And that's I mean, do I think she thinks, oh, I'm just pushing it off to the next person? No, but I don't think she understands the real crisis that happens in 5 years.
Because in self-direction, if you don't have CDPAP, a lot of us don't have proper staffing, right? That's how we do it. We bring the two systems together. So she's really strategically taking away all the things that are working, and that's very scary for families.
The budget for New York State, is it 274 billion, or am I off by like a couple of billion? You know, it's big.
It's more, it's 300. I think it's 300 now, but yeah.
So why does they have to cut it from here? You can't tell me all the places that you can cut, it has to come from Medicaid and from the disabled and from the elderly. It just doesn't seem to make sense. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
It doesn't, but it was Jim's point, I think, a bit earlier, which was they can do it because there's no face that's going to, there's nothing, no news to make. It sounds like they're making the system work better. I mean, to people who don't navigate it, get rid of all these fiduciaries that they point to two companies in New York City that have defrauded the system, and we're all supposed to say, oh yeah, that's right, she's making it better. they don't get it. And so again, the answer is use the moments to impress on her and push on state lawmakers in a way that makes them uncomfortable.
Well, you've given us so many things to think about, so many ways to go forward. So hopefully we're going to be able to follow up with you again
Yes.
and come up with a concrete plan and let you know when we're all going to the war room so you can come with us. That's what it
I'll
sounds
come with
like.
you. I have no problem doing that. You keep me in the loop, but try to link arms with some other groups that have the same concern. Maybe they aren't the ones that you know. There are some that just will never line up, but
Yep.
there are a handful that have these same concerns statewide. I know in my district, Stick was one of them in the Binghamton region. But find those groups that are willing to do the same thing. And yeah, I'd occupy the place personally to make the change.
Yeah, well, I think that's pretty much where we're all coming from. We're 2 years like in formation. We've really had a lot of traction. We're still waiting for our 1023 to go through IRS because that's you know how fast they are.
Yeah.
But you know, we're getting a lot of traction, and I think we all are kind of leaning towards that. Between that and getting some press, and that'll be one way to get press for sure. So, Jim, you want to take us home here and wrap this up? Did you leave? You may have.
No. Still here. Yeah. So really appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate the hand of friendship that you've held out to us. We will take advantage of it, and we'll figure out with you offline what makes sense. I think probably the very next step would be a smaller meeting with you and whatever staff you have about strategy, and
us giving support for you to get that chair role and get on that council.
That's
we can
you
certainly
took the
rattle around.
words the words out of my mouth, Jackie. And just want to, before you leave, just to give you a quick view of, we have a couple of other members of our board here as well, although I can't add them to the spotlight if they don't have their video on, Molly. But Susanna's on our board as well, and Molly and Stacy couldn't be here because she had to deal with stuff with her child who's entering that transition zone from age 16 on up. So
do you self-direct? Does your daughter have self-direction? Is that your plan? Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah, that's where we are now. Yeah.
So you're part of the coalition now, my friend.
Like it or not. Yes, we are.
Yeah. So again, I really appreciate your time today, and we will be in touch, and we'll be posting this for those who couldn't hear. So let's see what sort of final message. I'll throw it back to you, Mark, for whatever final message you have for our group.
No, you've heard it. Don't give up. We're on the side of angels, and we just need to let the others see and know that. So, count on me. Include me, and I'm happy to take those next steps with you.
Terrific.
Excellent.
Thank you so very much. I knew I liked you when I met you.
I'm good in small doses.
They say that about me.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Be well.
Thank you.
Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Be well. Thank you.